Good evening, everybody. Good evening, everyone here in the Oostserre, and very good evening to those that are or will be watching us from home. It is a great pleasure to carry on with the program this semester, and we are meeting here to finally celebrate Design with Empathy, Pedagogies for a Fractured World. This is a conversation that started a couple of months ago, I remember, with Caroline and with Mahil, that will introduce themselves now, a few months ago. And I think it's really great that we managed to frame this conversation as ideas of pedagogy. I will give immediately the word to Caroline and to the participants, Mara, Arna, and Saja, who are joining us here today. Caroline will take care that they are properly introduced. I would just like to take the opportunity here now to invite you all to visit the exhibition currently taking place in the first floor, in the corridor of the first floor, Architecture and Colonization. I think it's a very good way of understanding why we're here also today. I just went to visit it, and I spent some time looking at it. I fully recommend it. I guess that many of the topics, or some of the topics that are mentioned in the exhibition, will also be mentioned here tonight. But without further ado, I give the word to Caroline Newton, who will be conducting the evening. Together, 3 panelists, and finally Margie van Roos will be our respondent. The floor is yours, Caroline. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Javier, for the introduction, and welcome to audience, which is now small, but I'm sure online more people will find this talk, because I think it's an important conversation we're having today. As this BK talks, indeed, like Javier said, focus on empathy, and can empathy be a critical dimension of architectural pedagogies, by which we try to kind of resist individualism, resist fraction, resist increasing polarization, and try to embrace connection, and really try to think how we can equip our students to engage with contested histories and fractured communities, but always keeping this empathy in mind, and so thinking of how design can contribute to building environments that promote understanding, that foster dialogue, and maybe even try to repair things. And I think it's really important today, because it's clear you just open the television and you see that there's increased polarization, nationalism is resurging, and of course the impact of our neoliberal ideologies are very, very clear. So also in educating architects, we really need to take these observations into account and think about the kind of pedagogies that can help us to prepare future architects, to prepare future urbanists to navigate these complexities with care, with responsibility, and I think with a commitment to peace. It's important to and strange to having to emphasize this need for peace again in today's world. So how can we really think about these things within a faculty of architecture? And so I'm really, really happy to have 3 powerful women as our panelists, and Mahil, who will be a respondent, reflecting on some of the things that we will be sharing with you tonight. And so first of all, on my right-hand side is Mara Echtay. She's an urbanist, and she's currently a PhD researcher here at TU Delft, and she works on the intersection of spatial planning, epistemic justice, and post-conflict recovery. And with her background in architecture and urbanism, she tried to challenge dominant paradigms by centering insurgent knowledge, collective memory, and grassroots agency, specifically in context marked by conflict, displacement, and fragmentation. And she has shown how you can do that in her amazing graduation project that focused on Syria. And she is still actively involved in these transnational networks with the Syrian diaspora. On my left-hand side, there is Arna Makci. And you're the co-founder of Studio LA, exploring societal issues through public architecture, including building accessibility, refugee housing, and also the impact of war. And her studio focuses on understanding the history, the present, and the future of places. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm having to do this. To meet the community needs. And some projects include meeting spaces, memorials, and pavilions aimed at fostering equality and dialogue. And you're also the author of Mortal Cities and Forgotten Monuments. And it's named as one of the best architectural books in 2016 by The Guardian, which is something for our audience to take a look at, I think. And then we have Saja. And Saja is a Palestinian architect and educator whose work explores the impact of spatial design on social dynamics within educational contexts. In her practice, she challenges conventional classroom structures, aiming to reconstruct them through the lens of radical pedagogies. And she's currently teaching at the Gerrit Rietveld Academy and the Academy of Architecture in Amsterdam. Saja is also the co-founder of Common Ground, a collaborative artistic, gastronomic, and spatial project, as well as Remove the Dot, a research initiative focused on curriculum design and critical education. And finally, there is Michiel, who is our respondent tonight. And he's a professor here at this faculty of environmental behavior and design. And when you will look at his profile, you can see that he's very much interested in the interaction between environment, behavior, and urban design. And he studied architecture, environmental psychology in Eindhoven, and in 1997 he came to Delft, starting first as a researcher, looking into social aspects of sustainable urban development. Okay, and I think with this very, very long introduction, I think it's finally time to go to the presentations. And I first want to give the floor to Mara. We have asked all our panelists to briefly introduce themselves, but in their introduction already to link to the topic of tonight's. Mara.
All right. Thank you, Caroline, for this introduction. All right. Yes. Hello, everyone. I'm so happy to be here with you having this conversation today. I will be reflecting on both my master thesis and my postmaster research with a question in mind. What does it mean to design with empathy within a world that it's marked by injustice and fracture, and where those both are the norm and that not the exception? So reflecting back on my motivation to do both researches always led me to this moment of my life captured in this image where I had to stop my architecture studies because of the war in Syria, for safety reasons, of course. And I got engaged in the humanitarian response in my city, so I was working with displaced communities. It was exactly here where I witnessed how those camps were shaped by neglect and how children grew among those rocks and tents. And I saw how those camps were marked by injustices. So I did both researches as a way to uncover this injustice and expose it, and as a way to tell that design can actually be committed to justice. But the question is, whose justice, and who defines what is just and what is unjust? Which brings me to my first theme that I want to discuss with you today, which is epistemic justice. Whose knowledge counts? Who can say that these solutions and those policies should be legitimized and should be the norm and should be used? Well, from my research and from my experience on the ground and within humanitarian and architectural responses, most probably the knowledge that gets legitimized is Western formulated policies and approaches. As an example, you can take this IKEA tent, which was given in northwest Syria after the earthquake. It kind of shows this imported knowledge and imported logic that it's marked by the political sanctions in Syria, the same sanctions that have kind of denied the emergency architectural response to be transitioned into a more permanent and dignified response, which had eventually led to those city-like camps where more than 4 million people were living within those camps, and 70% of them live basically in tents. While on the ground, on the other hand, people actually were kind of providing a different logic that it's marked by earth architecture. People were having this ability to recover using those local materials. It's not perfect, of course, but it's there, it's local, it's sustainable, and it's dignified. And more importantly, it answers to their needs. This is exactly what epistemic justice looks like, where the voices and the needs of those people are legitimized and are taken into consideration. Eventually, this has led me to make a shift in my research. I shifted towards listening, documenting, and learning from those communities. Alongside with my research partner in the postmaster research, we documented the demands of the affected communities, the values that was reflected within recovery efforts, and their small-scale and bigger-scale recovery interventions. And those demands, values, recovery were like the basics, principles that have eventually led to this more sustainable recovery framework, a framework that it's anchored by the local knowledge that shifts the top-down imposed humanitarian response to a more locally based and community-based response that shows that recipients of the aid can actually be an active agents in the post-conflict and post-crisis recovery. Different spatial interventions answer to different architectural, humanitarian architecture principles such as intersectional architecture and also climate adaptation and local building materials. But engaging in such a polarized and politically charged context like Syria poses a critical question. Can spatial planning ever be apolitical, or is it inherently a tool of power? This diagram from my master thesis, I think it answered this question quite well. It links the different spatial policies with the different political milestones in Syria, and it directly shows how it affected the lives of Syrians through either economic indicators or social indicators. It shows that space in Syria have never been neutral. It was always used by the dictatorship as a way to fragment, suppress Syrians. But also engaging with conflict contexts shows the complexity of those contexts. But I argue that we have to embrace this complexity. We shouldn't hide from it. We should embrace it. We shouldn't accept the simplified political narratives that it's imposed by different political parties. And that's what I tried to show in this diagram. It acts as a counter-argument to the Western simplified narratives of the Syrian conflict that have tried to frame the conflict as a sectarian war or as a climate change conflict. It shows the different intersectionality of the injustices that have led to the revolution in 2011. And this brings me to my next theme. Fractured words required situated political pedagogies. As designers in technical universities, we are always trained to deliver technical solutions, and we are always asked not to be political and to be neutral. We are always taught, and we always hear about academic neutrality, where I argue that neutrality in conflict context is complicity, and it can be complicity. As Donna Haraway says, that all knowledge is situated. It comes from where? It comes from someone. We should admit our biases, and we should acknowledge our positionality and not hide behind a false universality. In conflict context, not taking position is a position that usually upholds the injustices in the status quo. And that's why in my master thesis, I took a clear political stance. I stood with the Syrian people against the Syrian regime, the dictatorship. That's why I document and I exposed the spatial tyranny that was perpetuated by the Syrian regime and his Russian and Iranian allies. I tried to show that through different methods, such as this method of documenting and exposing what happened in Damascus. So what does it mean to design with empathy and care? I argue that it means to let go of our heroism mentality of designers and adapt a more community-based approach to design with the communities that we serve. And I argue that it should be done with responsibility. The same responsibility that have led me to embrace the uprising that was happening in my city 2 years ago, I tried to amplify their voices as a way of moving forward in the post-conflict era. I analyzed more than 1,500 flyers to come up with the patterns of resistance, to show how those people were actually resisting the dictatorship and the spatial tyranny of the dictatorship. And I showed how those patterns of resistance, whether on the smaller scale, like reclaiming public spaces and reclaiming the right to protest, towards more on the bigger scale, like combating climate change, was happening on the different scales of the city. Resistance doesn't happen in abstract. It is scaled, it's spatial, and it's patterned. This actually challenged our top-down approach as designers in our interventions. So this have led me eventually to rethink the role of spatial designers and architects within conflict contexts. I argue that as a spatial designer, the first step in the post-conflict era or phase, if there ever is a post-conflict phase, shouldn't be designing. It should be moderating a conversation for people, for war-torn societies to get back together. That's why I developed this reconciliation tool where people can actually heal and talk together through narrating and reflecting. I argue that our conventional ways of designing usually lack the ability to understand the complexity and the nuances of those politically charged conflicts, that we should make space for more methods and interdisciplinary methods coming from different disciplines such as peace building, sociology, and anthropology that can hold space for this complexity and for this traumatic experience that people in conflict contexts suffer from. This will also hold space for participants to narrate the future narrative and then what they expect and what they want and demand of the future narrative of their country. In this case, it's Syria. I didn't try to impose my future wanted scenario, but I rather gave the space for participants to narrate their own scenario and wanted scenario, because I believe that future should be co-authored and not delivered. And ending with this quote that I want to read to you, empathy is not the end, it's the beginning. In a world marked by deepening divides and polarization, we don't need more observers, we need allies. Empathy must become solidarity, and solidarity in design means showing up differently, with humility, with care, and with a deep belief that space can be just. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mara. You gave us already a lot of food for thought, and we will definitely come back to that. Thank you for, yes, thank you. But first, let's hear from Arna.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here. Becoming an architect kind of happened coincidentally, following my intuition and a set of values. So I wasn't one of those kids who spent their days building with Lego. In fact, it was quite the opposite. Not construction, but destruction became central. Destroyed cities and deliberately targeted communities have shaped my reality for as long as I can remember. Air raid alarms, bombings, the occupation of our apartment. Later, there were family visits to cities with apartment blocks that were riddled with bullet holes, and every year we walked through countless cemeteries. But none of this felt pitiful to me. It was simply normal. And in a way, I think this is what eventually led me to architecture, not out of a desire to design or to build, but because architecture became a lens to understand why all of this has happened, to explore how architecture can reflect societies. So I'm going to show you a personal project, which I hope shows you the way I work and approach architecture. So on November 29, 2017, I was nervously waiting for the court's verdict. Would justice be served? Then a message popped up. He's poisoned himself. I'd seen him years earlier at the tribunal in The Hague. Sitting in a public gallery, I had expected to be surrounded by other victims, but instead I sat among the families of war criminals. There was no remorse, no sorrow, only silence about the future of those whose lives have been shattered. In prison, many of these war criminals thrived, writing books, spreading nationalist ideology. Justice didn't stop the violence. That day, Slobodan Praljak was sentenced to 20 years for multiple war crimes, including the destruction of the Stari Most, the old bridge of Mostar, a cultural icon. He stood and declared, Slobodan Praljak is not a war criminal, and drank poison. The curtain dropped. His dramatic suicide diverted attention from his crimes. I was furious. He had robbed victims of accountability once more. The old bridge, Mostar's heart, was destroyed on November 9, 1993. Built in the 16th century, it united two sides of the city. For centuries, it symbolized tolerance and connection. Its destruction was an attack on the multi-ethnicity itself. Without the bridge, Mostar's lost its soul. Before the war, no one spoke of Croats or Muslims. We were all Mostarci, people of the city. Religion was secondary, often barely visible in daily life. But that changed when nationalist Croat ambitions turned toward erasing the presence of people with a Muslim background from the city through territorial occupation and the pursuit of dominance over Mostar. Praljak's destruction wasn't random, it was strategic. Libraries, mosques, museums, universities, targets meant to erase culture and memory. Milan Kundera once wrote, the first step in liquidating a people is to erase its memory. Praljak understood that perfectly. He was no ignorant brute. He had degrees in engineering, philosophy, sociology. He directed theaters, as well as Shakespeare plays. He knew the power of culture and how to destroy it. By demolishing Mostar's shared space, he aimed to erase identity. Mostar never truly recovered. It became a divided city. Croats occupied one side, while Bosniaks were forced to live on the others. Schools, hospitals, football clubs, everything became separate. On the Croatian side, streets were renamed in honor of war criminals. Monuments to division emerged from the ruins. The bridge was rebuilt in 2004, a near-perfect replica. But the damage wasn't only physical. The bridge had once been a place of connection, a symbol of shared life. Now it marks separation. Mostar will never be the same. I was born in Čapljina, just like Praljak. During the war, he oversaw concentration camps where male family members were imprisoned. We were forced to flee. On the day we escaped, another Croatian family had already moved into our apartment. When we dared to return, years later, they were still there, using our furniture, our plates, our cups. It's surreal to feel erased, like you never existed. Chaplin is still now fully dominated by nationalists, with on every streetlight a Croatian flag hanging to convince everyone it's a Croatian city now. And since a few years there's a graffiti of Praljak's face and his last words, and many still see him as a hero. As an architect, I often reflect on the silence that surrounds destruction and on how architecture can be used as a tool to colonize or divide. We celebrate new buildings, but rarely pause to question the processes we engage in as architects. Whose ambitions are we truly serving through our designs? Is our desire to build overshadowing the needs of society and its citizens? Mostar's diving tradition, jumping from the old bridge, dates back to 1567. It was a symbolic act of dedication to the city, a declaration that you were a true Mostarac. Even during the war, when the bridge was destroyed, people built a platform to preserve the tradition. I designed a speculative project, a diving school where people can not only learn to dive, but also reconnect with the city. The structure would be situated across from a high school where Croatian and Bosniak students study separately. The 50-centimeter steps encourage learning higher diving. They also function as a tribune where people can sit and gather. Swimming and diving teach Mostar's inhabitants to keep their heads above water. But it was never meant to be built. It was an idea, a provocation. Can shared experience lead to shared space? And when I presented my book, Mortal Cities and Forgotten Monuments in Mostar, the city was tense. Just days earlier, people had lit candles for Praljak in front of the cultural center where I was speaking. The audience was sparse, the atmosphere heavy, no one asked questions, everyone seemed afraid. But the next day, things shifted. Together with Aida Kalender from organization Akcija Sarajevo, we organized a diving workshop for kids. Local hero Lorenz Listo, a champion diver, taught children from both sides of the city. They learned and they talked about the city's tradition and history. Now, Listo has opened a diving school and built a platform near the bridge where kids like this girl, Noura, can practice diving with the goal to one day take a dive from the bridge. Landscapes and communities can be destroyed in seconds, but rebuilding them takes generations. It's not about the bridge or the design of a diving school. It's about the people who, despite suffering and dehumanization, still choose to create something better. As architects, I believe we can support citizens in a humble way, not with the ambition to simply build, but by offering new perspectives on how we live and connect. Our role is to help guide these processes with care and responsibility. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Arna. Okay, Saja,
Thank you so much for inviting me and amazing presentations. I think I come a bit from a different perspective today. First of all, I'm not necessarily going to speak about my practice. My practice is basically about educational environments and how do we design for emancipatory education, how do we hijack the classroom and take agency over the environment that students inhabit. How does it respond to their bodies, to their embodied experience and their desires? And this topic that I work with along with my students is heavily centered around empathy, basically. But today I will not be speaking about that. I would like to get back to it in the conversation later. Out of deep urgency, I will be speaking about design with lack of empathy. How do you design for oppression? And I will be talking about it from the lens of Palestine. I have a few examples to show. This is one. This is a checkpoint 300 in Bethlehem. What I would like to ask you is not to only listen to me and look at the pictures. I would like you to try to experience what I'm going to describe in your body, basically. Because in order for us as designers to design with empathy, we need to perceive space as something that affects our bodies and lives in our memories. So this place basically lives in my memory, but it lives in my muscle memory as well, not only in my brain. I still feel the effects of this place on my body. Before I speak a bit about it, I would like to ask a question that already been tackled by both your presentations. Do you think that architecture is political? If you agree, please raise your hand. Amazing. So through my presentation, I would like to just tackle the question of what responsibility does architecture have over achieving justice in human life. Caroline, you were mentioning the word peace a lot, and I would like to make a comment on that. I think justice is what we need to be designing for. And by achieving justice, I think peace will be achieved automatically. Checkpoint time. Try to imagine with me, feel it in your body. Because these pictures, they were taking, 2008. This still exists, and every day there is a new addition to this structure. But I think the feeling remains the same, and that's what I would want you to more be aware of. Concrete corridors, barbed wires, turnstiles is what you might see when looking at an Israeli checkpoint, or as they call it, crossing point. Those checkpoints function as more than a spatial barrier by distributing and controlling the flow of time for Palestinians. The unpredictability, the prolonged waiting, and the sense of isolation it enraged is compared to present time. These checkpoints, as part of a broader system of Israeli colonial control, impose a fragmented, delayed, and devalued sense of temporality on Palestinians, hindering communication and community formation. While these checkpoints play a fundamental role in the colonial project, it also points at its inherent impermanence and precarity of the settler colonial structure itself. These checkpoints are existing in multiple places in the West Bank, where I come from. They are entrance points to the 48 lands, and some people live in Jerusalem, for example, and have to cross all these checkpoints on a daily basis in order to reach their workplaces or their universities. And I would like you to look at the design and see the materials that are used and the idea of the corridor and how it controls or manipulates the flow of time for Palestinians. Now you see them empty, but in reality they are packed with thousands of people, usually workers who have been trying, who work in the 48 lands or the so-called Israel. They have to line up there at 5 in the morning or even before every day in order to pass. They have to go through security check. And I just need you to try to imagine and try to feel it in your body. I recall the day that I passed this crossing. I was really surprised by the entire process. And the thing that got my attention the most, and because I'm an architect and I think spatially, is the moment that I stopped at the soldier window where they wanted to check my ID. And I realized that I'm standing in a corridor that looks like an animal passage with naked concrete around me and a lot of metal, while the soldier himself is sitting in a room with white walls and plants and books on a shelf. And that, to me, stayed in my mind. Other than listening and trying to feel with your body, I also would like you to look at some references afterwards. Just take like one keyword from me, checkpoint 300. Please check it out and look at the research Checkpoint Time by Helga Tawil Suri. She has more analysis of how checkpoints manipulate time in the Palestinian context. The second topic I want to talk about is present time. I've never been to prison, thank God. I hope I never go to prison, especially Israeli prisons. But there are multiple Palestinian freedom fighters who have been held in prisons for many years. One of them is Walid Daqqa, who is now a martyr. And Walid has spent many years of his life in prison, and he tried to visualize how it looks like. These are some of his drawings that he made before his martyrdom in 2023. I also would like you to take a look at them and try to digest what you see. This is how the prison feels, not only looks. I would like to read from him. Walid Daqqa is the one who proposed the idea of the parallel time, prison time. Walid Daqqa said, her true age. I don't know my mother's true age. My mother has two ages, her chronological age, which I do not know, and her prisonological age. Let's say her age in the parallel time is 19 years. That was the words of the thinker and freedom fighter and the political prisoner Walid Daqqa. Describes the systematic colonization of time in Zionist prisons in a letter to his friend. I would like to quote him again. In our parallel time, most of us haven't given an answer to that question, posed usually to children. What do you want to be when you grow up? I, even now, even though I am 44 years old, have no idea what I would like to be when I grow up. I also would like to quote him again, because he described his relationship to object and to the architecture of the cell. Through their relationship with place, the people of parallel time develop relationships no stranger than those with objects. There, you are suddenly developing a spatial relationship with specks on the ceiling of your cell, brought about by leaking water and the humidity. Or you might develop a relationship with a hole or crack in the door. Who would understand a dialogue replete with fervor, with emotion, with interruption and description, as if it were a conversation on the topic of heaven and its door, and not on the cell and its holes? The first prisoner, there is nothing better than Department 4. Oh, to be back in the days of Department 4. The second prisoner, sure, but the best thing about the Department 4 was Cell 7. The first prisoner, expelling all the air from his lungs in heartbreak over those days, interrupts, I know, but what can you say? From this cell, you can hear the precise crack of dawn, the sound of cars on the highway. The second prisoner also interrupting, but that's not it. You know, the cell door, between the cell door and the wall, right at the hinges, is an entire 2-centimeter crack, so wide you can see through it while laying in bed. You can see through the ends of the earth. The first prisoner, man, why are you saying this? Department 4 is the best. How simple the dreams, how great the human, how small the place, how grand the idea. It took me 40 minutes to find a picture for the apartheid wall. They are all ugly. But this wall is erect in Palestine, in the West Bank. Some information about it. The concrete wall is present at Beit Lahem, Hebron, parts of Ramallah, Qalqilia, parts of Tulkarem, and throughout the Jerusalem envelope. It is 8 meters high, twice the height of Berlin Wall, with watchtowers and a buffer zone from 30 to 100 meters wide for electric fences, trenches, cameras, sensors, and military patrols in other places. The wall consists of layers of fencing and razor wire, military patrol roads, sand paths to trace footprints, ditches, and surveillance cameras. I will leave it to your imagination to kind of try to imagine what this might do to a community, or even to the animals, to the birds, to the wild animals. I will end with this new addition to the catalogue of architectural tyranny in Palestine. This is a new fashion situation that we're having now. That's after October 7th. We have more than 898 metal gates that are distributed all around the West Bank, not allowing people to pass to their villages and homes. Unpredictable times of opening and closing. Basically, not much research has been done on this because it's quite new and we don't know how long it's gonna exist. But I just wanted to show you very few examples because it's supposed to be 7 minutes. I don't know how long have I been speaking. And just keep the question with you, like, these are all products of basically architects. These are products, there's a material reality that suppresses and manipulates and controls human life and flow. And as practitioners, I find it important before designing for empathy, trying to understand the material reality and what exists in the world in the first place. And always take these as examples of what not to do, but also as a guide for your moral compass. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Saja. Well, you have added another couple of layers to really make us reflect. And of course, there are many questions that come up in my head, but maybe kind of what I found striking in all your presentations is, okay, as architects, as designers, and going through our education, we always get this idea, okay, you can design the world, you can design all these opportunities and possibilities, but what you have shown very clearly in each of the presentations is how most of the design is actually being used as what you call a catalogue of tyranny. It's kind of mind-blowing how in each of the presentations the number of examples of how architecture, how spatial organization is actually doing the opposite of what we dream of when we start our education, and how important kind of this the materiality has on people and people's lives. And so like you say, okay, I probably took more than 7 minutes. I think that that's the case for all of you, but it really also shows how difficult it is to limit yourself when you talk about such a topic. It's impossible to just go very quickly, very superficially over it. And another point I think that became very clear in what you were saying is that, in all of your talks, it's clear that architecture and design is definitely not neutral. It's very political and it has an impact. So it really forces us to think about this. And kind of this brings me to my first question. Knowing this and kind of still kind of when you also say in your practice with students and rethinking or hijacking the classroom, empathy is important. How do you try to do this? Because hearing these stories, it can be so overwhelming that you think, okay, there's nothing to do, but still there is kind of, when you practice this in the classroom and maybe in other ways, that there is still kind of empathy or hope, or kind of what you say first, we maybe need justice. So how do you do that? How do you try to practice that? I don't know who wants to start attempting to answer.
Yeah, I think it's super hard to do it. It's not easy. It can be emotionally draining because it's so easy to look away. It's like the easiest thing that you can do, to just look away and ignore all those complicated and multi-layered injustices. But I think it goes back to your values as a person. Like, do you actually want to do that, like to go in the easy side? Or would you commit to justice, but also, like, again, what is just? It's also related to your positionality and how you see justice and what narrative do you believe in. So I think it's not easy to do, and it's directly linked to your values as a person. But what I try to do is, in my research, as I said in my presentation, I embraced this complexity. So I dived into it and into the different layers of it, and I tried to show it. Like, look how complex it is, but I'm not hiding from this complexity. I want to show it, and I want to expose it. And the how, I think it's related to your vision as a designer. So you decide how to expose it, either by documenting, by designing, there are like multiple tools to do it. But yeah, this is how I think it can be done.
Yeah. Thank you, Mara. And kind of elaborating on this, and maybe afterwards, I want to ask you also about how you do this in the classroom, because we work together during the graduation, and this process is it's not easy, and it requires also from teachers to dare to go and step together, and it's emotionally not easy. So I'm curious to hear a bit more about that from your experience in the classroom with students.
Well, I think the first thing you need to do is to unlearn what you've learned in architecture school, because architecture school is designed to make you quite competitive, and the way I experienced it personally, and it's also quite individualistic. Like, you are a designer, you are a creator, you need to trust your vision and just hustle and get the best grades, join the best firm, this and that. I think it took me some time to unlearn that first, and then to ask a lot of questions, to look at the built environment around us and understand that it's made of walls, and these walls, okay, they do provide a home, but also they exclude one. And the second thing is that this built environment is quite permanent, and the permanency of it is quite limiting. I don't want to be very radical and say quite narcissistic, but it kind of is. And I think in order for someone to be able to erect a building in this way and have enough confidence to create something that will be permanently affecting people's lives, I think before that they need to understand what empathy is, because the aftermath or the outcomes of what they do is not easy to erase, I would say. In the classroom, the first thing, the way I work with my students, the first thing is that I give them the agency to create the space they want to be in. And this is something they do through what they feel in their body. Like for me, I always need something soft to sit on, for example. I always provide tea that I brought from home, the smell of the tea in the classroom, the configuration of the seats as well, taking time in the start, 10 minutes, 15 minutes to check in and gossip and just let it all out, and then try to work with the students, sometimes in groups, sometimes one-to-one. Try to respond to their needs one by one. Give enough attention to each one of them, and try to listen to what they're actually and really interested in, and try to facilitate a way to take them towards what they want to explore more. Just be a facilitator and melt the hierarchy between the educator and the student. This is how I do it, or this is how I aspire to do it.
Beautiful, thank you. I think we try to practice that, but still we can practice much more to indeed bring this kind of also embodied experience and this kind of care for students and each other in our classrooms. I was also kind of really triggered by what you said about the wall being a home, but also being a divider, and the kind of the importance of the physicality. And maybe there I want to also ask you, Anna, because with the example of the bridge, it's destroyed, it's no longer there, and with your installation, you actually, it feels almost like what you create in the installation and the project is more what the bridge is than what the bridge would be if you just reconstruct it. Linking to what you said about you can build building, but actually you need to do much more. It's not about the physicality. I remember from our kind of pre-discussion as well that sometimes architecture actually polarizes even more, even if it tries to reconstruct whatever reconstruction is. Could you elaborate a bit on that?
Yeah, I think in the example of Mostad and the old bridge, for me, I think it was very much also about telling an untold story, because the bridge was rebuilt in 2004 in exactly the same way as it was before, but it was also a political message. So it was a message from the European Union and the UN to say, okay, the separation now is over, there's no conflict anymore. Well, if you walk 50 meters to one side or the other from the bridge, you come into a city that is destroyed and divided. And this story about what this bridge, or the destruction of the bridge, the stories around it, and what happened after are not told. Also, the story of the Croatian impact in Bosnia is also never told. It's never in the media. So doing this project really came from out of a necessity, an urgency to learn about it, because I didn't find any or almost no information about it, but also sharing this knowledge. For me, that it's really about this. It's a necessity. It's not work. It's life. So I think that's really important in this way of working. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And I'm looking at the time, and I want to give our audience time for questions, because I can imagine that there will be some. So I would first like to ask Michiel to reflect on all the stories and points that we've heard.
Thank you, Caroline. Well, first, all three of you, thank you for your stories. Because my task is to try to bring it back to education, but what you did was, of course, pure education. It's personal stories, it's more than knowledge, it becomes wisdom. And that personalization and that wisdom, that by that approach you connect to people. Specifically also what you said, you talked about, that's maybe rephrased in my expertise, embodied cognition. The feeling of a space that stays with you. So that's not objective and precise knowledge, but it's very important wisdom to share. You all shared a very impressive story. Maybe I could say something about my background, which is completely different. I'm Dutch, I'm born here, I'm raised here. And this country always, we talked about it for a moment, has this reputation of being tolerant for all. And in the past, when we lived in a different era, I think I was proud of that. We're tolerant people, we have the gay parades, multicultural neighborhoods in Rotterdam, projects for refugees. I'm emphasizing for, because that's what we did. So I think about 10 years ago, I found out that a tolerant society doesn't imply that all citizens are tolerant. And doing something for newcomers is not doing something with fellow citizens. But maybe even more important, being tolerant is very passive. And in the end, I find that shocking, because that's not about, and that's related to your stories, taking care. It's not about empathy. And that's rooted a bit in this culture, which is also my culture. So that's also good to know. Now you know why Dutch are overall quite friendly, but lacking hospitality. So there's a difference in there. So also listening to your stories, what we need, and now I bring it to education also in this faculty. What we need is commitment. So we need to include fellow citizens, fellow humans on an equal basis. Let's call that empathy. So for our faculty, it starts with commitment to each other. But it also has consequences for education, how we educate and what we educate. And by coincidence, yesterday I talked to a colleague from your section, Peter Pelser, and he mentioned the word in the context of education, subjectification. And I find that intriguing, because subjectification, that's what you did. That's beyond socialization. It's about your personal relation and commitment with the world. You also mentioned that. In the end, then we get to personal values. And how to include that in our education. And that's for us a huge task, also for fellow educators, because most of all, we start, of course, with learning goals and end terms. This goes beyond that. But I think, and you're the living proof of that, by this subjectification, you feel attached, you feel commitment. and you feel empathy. And how to get that into our curriculum, I think that is our task. Learning from you and how to spread this type of message with personal commitment, and let's call it empathy. So that isn't really a question, that's more what I learned from you in the past hour. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Michiel. And I think it's an important message on this kind of responsibility to bring these things into the curriculum. But I also heard you kind of saying, okay, there is... what was it that you said? The responsibility, yes. And I think responsibility is very often a difficult word for architects and designers to use. And it's an open question. I also think to you, are we ready to take that responsibility, and to what point, and then what does it look like? So I think that's an important additional takeaway point. I want to open the floor for some questions. Is there anyone who wants to add, reflect, ask a question?
Well, thank you very much for your contributions. I really feel it in my body. Being an educator in this very fortunate country, I think we ignored so many things, both in education and in our values in society. Since we doesn't feel it, we don't feel the climate change. Only now we do feel it. We didn't feel war. Only now we see that there is a need to change. So I wonder why we are so spoiled. Maybe you can answer and give us advice how we can change the education. It starts in the primary school or even before. And as an adult, it's so hard to really take action, talk on different issues with your friends and families, while there are so many bars outside and there is a nice beach. We prefer to go there instead of paying attention on topics that are needed.
Okay. Someone? No? Someone?
So how can we change?
I can give a try, but it's a difficult question. I think it's about becoming aware and not sticking your head in the sand. And I think a lot of people are, that of course we're very fortunate to live here, but a lot of people also teach their kids that everything is okay. You know, everyone just sticks their head in the sand, and we just act like we don't see things. So I think maybe, you mentioned primary school. I think it already starts with very small kids, just talking with them about issues in a simple way for them to become, easily and slowly aware of what is happening around them in the world, and to kind of, in a way, respond to that. So I think that. Yeah, that's the only way, like trying to become aware. Yeah, opening the eyes.
But it seems to be not a personal thing, but an institutionalized thing. It's not integrated in our teaching. It's not in the vision of our faculty or our university. It's just, there are many activists around, but it's not integrated. That's my feeling.
Yeah. But it doesn't have to come top down, huh? Like those small bottom-up radical approaches, and people who actually know, they can influence and they can build up a network of care and a network of empathy that can eventually influence the institutions. And what I want to build upon your thoughts is that, and also the responsibility, that we are responsible. Like, it's not okay not to know. It's not okay to stay ignorant. And this, I mean, with this globalized world, it's not just that it's happening on the other side of the planet, so it wouldn't affect me. It will eventually affect you. Like, I mean, a policy in the US have kind of disrupted the global economy in like 1 week. So, and this is one example. But then conflicts and climate change will eventually affect the whole world. So it's our responsibility to know and our responsibility to educate ourselves. Yeah, that's what I want to say.
I actually have an answer, but it's actually taking an example from here, from what happened in the past few weeks with the architecture and decolonization, colonization course. I think everyone has a duty and has a responsibility, and I've been following up on what was happening through this course and eventually the exhibition, and it was really funny for me to see all the disclaimers about putting the works behind glass because the names of the students are concealed. There's like physical barriers between the work and the people. Where is the action? Where is the mobilization? Where is the support? Where is the solidarity? If this class was like 30 students, 40 students, where's the rest of the faculty? Where's the rest of the university? If you are aware this is happening in your school and you decide to look the other way, then there is a serious problem. If your only purpose of coming to this school is to get a certificate and then get a job and then perhaps go to Saudi to build the Lion City with Mohammed bin Salman, then that's a really big problem. So this is something that you have to think about in this faculty. I've been here multiple times. I work in an art school. It's a completely different environment. And you can tell, because when you enter an art school, you see the stains of the students everywhere. On the floor, on the walls. You can see signs of protest. You can see opinions. You can see flavor. You can see everything. I'm not saying that art school is perfect, but allow the students to leave their stains in the building. Allow them to speak. Allow them to tell their opinions, to be in solidarity with each other. From top down, from down top, doesn't really matter. Just allow this environment.
I think it's really beautiful what you say also about kind of allow the stains of the students to be there and to stay there. And you gave the example of the exhibition. I'm also thinking back about to the Feminist Week, where also when we were talking during that week, it became clear that there is a history of feminist activism in the faculty, and you don't see it. It has disappeared. So it's this kind of these layers that get overwritten, and maybe if in the messiness of, I've also taught at an art school before, in the messiness of an art school, the messiness leaves behind all the other stories that. So I think that's actually a very kind of nice and very practical suggestion about how to create more space for students. Thank you for that. Anyone wants to add something?
Now I'm showing my age, because in the 80s, when I was a student, there was much more activism, because there was a perception of that, there was a need for it. So I followed courses like women's studies in that time. They were here. And then the years followed that we fall asleep. And also the faculty became...
Why?
Why? because we close our eyes before we fall asleep, I guess. We were having a luxury life. We were not aware that the world was in turmoil, which was also the case at different locations, too far away, maybe. And we had the idea we can handle it. It's fine. We're still in control. Today, I think it's more clear that no one is in control. And the world is indeed in turmoil. And that leads, first of all, to forms of stress. I think that's part of it. That's okay. And then we sometimes miss the handles and levers to act. That's why your stories are so important. Because acting is also personal. And that goes in different directions. But there should be also the space to act. So you're completely right. This is not an art school. Also because it's a university, it's much more not only formalized, but rationalized and top-down. That's what happened. Specifically because it's also a technical university. We had a protest for Gaza on the campus. I was there and students were walking by. I was observing them. They were talking about new forms of calculations, what they're going to do that afternoon. That caught their attention. So, due to the fact that the world is in turmoil, and due to it's so important to share these personal stories, I think people hopefully get a bit upset and realize we have to act, we have to do something, and we have to be committed, which imply personal commitment and also mutual empathy to act in the right direction. But hopefully we're moving back to that direction. Sorry, it moves quite slow, but due to the circumstances, I hope things will get better, and also you as a teacher get a space to go beyond the learning goals and talk about this personal commitment with one another. Because when we emphasize the learning goals and end terms, then we also create students that walk into your classroom and want to know, what do I have to do to pass this course? And that is sometimes more important than actually the content and the debate. So that's worrying, yeah.
I'm also really hoping that our stories that of course come from abroad, not within the Netherlands, that you don't see it as these stories from outside of your world or outside of this country, because I think, for one, the Netherlands or the Dutch state, the government has and is been involved in what we have experienced. So I think that is important, but it's not like we as kind of the rare examples that do this kind of work bring you knowledge. But I hope that also teachers within the classes here discuss issues that are important in our society, even in subjects about housing, or that's also really political. Ask students for their opinions. Ask to study what political parties think of this subject. How did it shape their thoughts during all these centuries? So I think it's really up to the faculty also itself to take this responsibility and not put it on like the people that come from outside as us to teach you and to bring knowledge.
Can I add something? I think it's important to give the students the space to problematize the idea of a university in the first place. You know, problematize the system that was ingrained in them, the educational system that they've already been sitting on a desk for 12 years and then they come here and there's all these rules. Where does it come from? That's a question that everyone needs to ask themselves. Students, teachers. How is it? What's the structure? Why does it exist in this way? I think the only way to develop models of education is to problematize the current ones, the normalized ones, right? And by problematizing the university, you start understanding what kind of ties it has with the architecture of tyranny that we've seen, right? With weapon development manufacturers, right? With whatever other things like that. You said this is a technical university, you have labs, you have so much technical and technological advancement. So that's one question. And by problematizing the university as a structure, you also start problematizing the state as a structure, no? What is this state? Where did it come from? Now I'm working with my students, also trying to go back to the roots of their education, going back to their personal experience in the classroom. And with that comes the curriculum itself, what they learn. Do they learn about the colonial history of the Netherlands? What do they know about it? How much of their life do they spend thinking about it? So all of that together, there needs to be a space to ask these questions in the first place. You need to allow students to problematize and not accept the status quo as the only thing that's possible. How do we do that? I'd like to leave you with the question.
May I respond for a moment? Thank you for that. Work, yes. Thank you for that. Because how you just formulated to problematize has to do with what you said before that. We need also to unlearn, because we don't address that explicitly. Because students coming here are overwhelmed by new knowledge, and then secretly, by learning people things, they unlearn other things. So it's good to make that explicit, but also having that debate indeed of the whole context in which we are learning and what we should learn and what we should know. So yes, I'm with you. Yeah.
Yeah, I also really would like to reflect on what you said, because I think it's very valuable, and it connects to what you said, Mara, about it's not okay to stay ignorant, not from as a student, but also not as a teacher. And I think before students, or before we can all start to really question and critically examine the structures in which we work, you need to know that they might be problematic. So as teachers also, we have this obligation or this responsibility to open the floor for that kind of critical thinking. So it also asks from us as teachers and educators to be very vulnerable, because suddenly you kind of create a space where everything can be questioned, within, of course, being critical and really think. But it's a shared responsibility. It's not staying kind of ignorant, but also as a teacher and educator, open the space to allow people to not stay ignorant. I think, and it's an important responsibility. I think in that sense. And then, to act on that and explore how we can create then different educational settings, like what you were explaining. I find it very, very inspirational, because it requires you also as a teacher to show your vulnerability and so on. So, yeah.
If I
Thank you for that.
Say something about that.
Yeah.
Because I wanted always to mention it, because I would never have been able to kind of dive into the complexity of the situation in Syria if it wasn't for Caroline's support, because she actually gave me the space to explore unconventional ways of designing and also researching. Of course, I had a lot of doubt in myself, and she was always affirming and giving me this affirmation that you're doing good, you're doing well. So I think as educators, it's so important to give the space for students to explore, to be vulnerable, and not to stay on this rigid way of thinking within these technical universities. So thank you for that.
Thank you for allowing me to work together. Was for me also a very important journey together. Good. I'm looking at the time. Do we have time for one more question? Yes. No burning questions. Maybe Javier, shall I try to maybe one takeaway from each of the participants, and then I want to formulate a couple of takeaways that I at least kind of take away from this important conversation. Mara, do you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, also I'm still reflecting on the journey. I think we are responsible to act. We are responsible to see what's happening worldwide, and also reflect on our ways of handling the world, that it's in turmoil. It's not okay to look away. We have the responsibility to react and to be hopeful, but in a radical sense, not in a naive sense. So we shouldn't say that, everything will become okay. It will be solved somehow. It wouldn't. Hope does exist, but we should act upon that. We should try to change things and not accepting the status quo.
Yeah, I don't have much to add to that. I completely agree, and I think it's really important to have this conversation with all the students here to talk about what drives you to be here, and what do you see around you? What action can you take? What kind of architect do you want to be? How do you want to relate to the world? I think these are all questions that are rarely, discussed within education, or where I studied, it wasn't for definitely. So, yeah.
Yeah, I also don't really have much to add, but in our previous conversation, you did mention the question, like, do we have hope? And I do believe 100% there's hope, although my presentation was pretty depressing, I know, but that's the reality of where I come from. However, because I was quoting Walid Daqqa quite a lot, and if you also, another resource that you need to check, Walid Daqqa, The Parallel Time. And all Palestinian prisoners, even though they spent more than 40 years in prison, they have hope, and it's a common say in Palestine, we teach hope, we teach life. And I think that it's also all possible by action. And by returning to the self and to the body, and to perceiving space through the lens of the body, not as something that's abstract or just a bunch of lines on a white canvas. Space is something that you experience, that you practice, that lives in your body. And this is the first thing that we should learn in architecture school. Before we learn how to write or how to make drawings, I think we need to think and try to provoke the students and their bodies and their heads to think of space through their memory as well. And I think that brings responsibility. Once you practice and understand space from that perspective, any line that you decide to put in your drawing will mean something more to you, and will allow you to think beyond the 2D or the 3D. Thank you.
Thank you. Mahil, you want to?
Well, one thing. Not yet. Okay. Maybe the other one. Thank you. You just said that your story may be a bit depressing. That might be true, but at the same time also the opposite. For me it also gives hope it gives handles to work within this faculty, to personalize and to realize indeed that every door, wall has different meanings. And for that personal connection is so important. That's why the drawing of the prison is so important, to realize what's the meaning of a door. And that's also cultural related, context related, etc. But having this option, hopefully in the future, to more personalize and creating more attachment, specifically interesting in this country that's so-called tolerant, to create this connection is hopefully, for me, a takeaway to create this empathy and getting to a different type of education.
Thank you. Okay, my own personal kind of summary and takeaways from this conversation. And first of all, I want to say I'm really very grateful that you came here to share these personal stories and make us reflect. And I think we need to do this more. And there are kind of 6 points. I can be brief. I will not be very elaborate, but the kind of that came out and that sometimes are very kind of, you think, yeah, of course, but it's important to really reflect on what it means. And the first one that you've showed in your stories is that architecture is very powerful. And that we need to first understand how it's kind of is used in oppressive ways before we can understand how it can liberate. And that means, secondly, that architecture and design is not neutral. It is very, very political, and we need to be aware of that. And thirdly, that architecture and design is something we experience embodied. It's not kind of a mere thing in the mind and in the design and in the philosophy. It's felt in every kind of grain of our bodies with all of our senses, from feeling, from smelling, from hearing, and we need to really understand that and think. When we draw a line, it's not just a line. It has an impact on people and people's bodies. And so I think for too long, and that is the fourth point I want to make that came up, is that for far too long, architecture has been about the objects. And I'm reflecting also about the conversation we had earlier this morning, Javier. But and in kind of in your story as well, and in the rebuilding, that too often the architecture as an object, as kind of a rebuilding or kind of then symbolizing something, it goes beyond or it forgets that it is there in a community. It is kind of situated, and it has become too much more about the creation, the object, and the creator of the object. And so that links to what you said about we need to step away from this hero idea of the designer and the architects. And we go to then the fifth point, the responsibility, and the responsibility in all the different shapes that we have been discussing, because that is what we need to final point, go to hope, and hope not kind of in this naive sense, but really radical hope that we cannot kind of see detached from justice. And I think with that point, I would like to close, and let's keep using our profession and our responsibility to work toward more just world. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Caroline. Do you have the clicker? Thank you very much. Well, thank you all very much for this conversation. It's been, you mentioned about reaching our bodies, and I think, at least in my case, you did it fully, 100%. And I thank you for bringing the testimony. I think it's very necessary that certain stories, all of these stories are told. And I think that we would be very irresponsible if we wouldn't have any empathy about it, and we do not anything about it. Yesterday, when thinking of these BK talks and reflecting on empathy, this is the first image that came to my mind. We all have our subjectivity, we all have our stories. I was born during a fascist regime, and luckily enough, the dictator died when I wasn't even aware of it. Still, I come from a family who spent all their youth fighting fascism. So I somehow understand very well what you have lived in the first person. Luckily, I didn't have to go through that, but in any case, it really touches one when we hear it. This is for me the most beautiful image talking about empathy that I could think of yesterday. It was painted in 1976, one year after Francisco Franco finally died. It represents for me reconciliation, and that's maybe something that we would also have to, it's been spoken about here today. And looking at the image, I started having a few thoughts. Normally I always say something about the beginning of the BK talks. I talk about it, but in the end I prefer to write something rather than bombard you as I usually do with a billion slides. It was personally touching, and I knew this would be like that today anyway. So I decided to write, which is what I also can control kind of well. Empathy is not a soft skill. It is not a luxury, an afterthought, or a sentiment. Empathy is a form of resistance, a political act, a way of practicing architecture that refuses indifference and disconnection. Today, we have heard how design education can open space for other ways of knowing and being, for humility, for repair, for care. We have seen that to teach and to learn design is not just to transfer skills, but to shape a position in the world. It is time, indeed, in a time marked by division, violence, and ongoing genocides, design must refuse neutrality. It must take a side, not in the service of ideology, but in defense of dignity, memory, and coexistence. We cannot teach the next generation of architects, we are all here, to design only for beauty or performance, but for justice, for understanding, and then peace. Design is never just about form. It is about who gets to imagine, who gets to speak, who gets to stay. Empathy is not about harmony. It is about listening in the face of conflict. It is about sitting with discomfort, acknowledging complicity, and designing with responsibility. Let's move beyond abstract studios and toward real places, real struggles, real communities. Let's stop building distance and start building solidarity. Let's learn to navigate complexity, not with cynicism, but with care. Not with fear, but with courage. Architecture must become a practice of connection. Education must prepare students to design not as masters, but as allies. Not above the world, but within it. Thank you all for being here, for contributing to this conversation, and for helping us imagine an architectural education that is alive to the world and accountable to it. This is not idealism, it's necessity. Thank you very much.
Well, to end this event after such, stories, questions, burning questions, I would like to speak about the next event next week. We are honored to welcome Rahel Shaw with us next week. She's currently teaching at our faculty, an award-winning architect and educator from Ethiopia. So please feel welcome next week and bring all your questions, because you have the opportunity to ask them to Rahel. So thank you very much for tonight, and we hope to see you next week.